What if the greatest wonder you will ever witness is already happening between your two breaths? Imagine the ordinary act of inhaling and exhaling as a doorway that opens and closes 1,000 times a day. In that doorway, the world offers itself in miniature. The provocative truth is this: we have been taught to look for fireworks and epiphanies, while a slow, quiet miracle arranges itself beneath our feet. To stand on the earth and inhabit the present is to discover that the sacred is not a separate realm, but the skin of this very moment. Begin by noticing how the present is frequently violated by projection. Plans, regrets, hopes, labels. These are like drafts under the door, pushing the present into corridors we cannot enter. Yet attention, when gently returned to the breath, becomes a key. It does not force the future to stop, nor erase the past. It simply slows their insistence and allows what is happening now to be felt with integrity. This is not an act of heroism. It is the simple discipline of presence. The miracle lies in the willingness to remain where you are, fully, without the usual evasions. The simplicity of this practice is deceptive. There is nothing glamorous about watching a breath. There is everything transformative about it. A single breath held with attention reveals layers of sensation that usually pass unnoticed. The subtle lift of the chest, the coolness at the nostrils, the way a thought leans toward judgment and then dissolves. Each of these is a small altar where the sacred can sit. By attending to these micro-phenomena, we cultivate a finer nervous system, one that can recognize the extraordinary lodged in the ordinary. Consider the everyday as a language of sacred science. A cup of tea is not merely a beverage, but a teaching about warmth and transience. A conversation is not merely exchange, but an invitation to presence. Walking down a street becomes a lesson in rhythm and connection. When attention rests in the present, the textures of life gain density. The mundane is reanimated, its contours sharpen, and the familiar acquires a luminous margin. This is not an aesthetic trick, but a reorientation of perception that turns our habitual recipes for living into new practices of wonder. There is also a moral tenderness in this way of being. Living fully in the present tends to soften harsh judgments and mechanical reactions. When you meet another with the fullness of attention, their gestures and words stop being obstacles to your plans and begin to be the very thing that teaches you. Compassion is born not from doctrine, but from this practice of bare noticing. An empathy that arises because attention alights on the presence of the other, and in doing so, recognizes the same fragile aliveness within oneself. Yet presence is not a constant state to be manufactured. It is a relationship we learn to return to. Sometimes attention will wander. Sometimes it will become dull. This is not failure, but the texture of the work. Each return to the breath is a renewal, a tiny resurrection, and with repetition, the returns come more easily. Over time, the habit of being present begins to color not only your quiet moments, but the noisy, difficult ones as well. Anger, sorrow, joy, these begin to speak at a different timbre when heard from the ground of the present. Before moving to the next step of this exploration, consider an image. A seed lying in the dark soil, patient and unremarkable, carrying within it the whole shape of a tree. What does it mean to nurture that seed? Is it not the same as learning to stand on the earth and heed each breath? If the seed is the present, What kind of tree might grow from your attention? The seed in the dark soil was the last quiet image, small and patient, carrying within it a possibility that waited without hurry. Follow that patience for a while and notice how the present moment resembles a seed bed more than a stage. It is a place where what is latent can form without spectacle, where the ordinary ground yields its contained miracles through a slow, homely alchemy. To stand on the earth, the seed in the dark soil was the last quiet image, small and patient, carrying within it a possibility that waited without hurry. Follow that patience for a while and notice how the present moment resembles a seed bed more than a stage. It is a place where what is latent can form without spectacle, where the ordinary ground yields its contained miracles through a slow, homely alchemy. To stand on the earth, as the first part suggested, is to learn the language of small beginnings and to honor the unremarkable processes by which life reshapes itself. There is a certain economy to attention that the seed teaches. Resources are not squandered on grandstanding. Instead, warmth and water are given precisely, with fidelity to what the seed needs, rather than to what the eye desires. In human terms, this economy looks like patience, a lowering of the dramatic volume that habitually demands immediate reward. When attention adopts this economy, the present ceases to be a thing to be conquered and becomes a teacher. The texture of time softens. Its edges are no longer jagged with urgency, but rounded by continuity. Moments begin to accrete rather than explode. Practice of this kind does not remove difficulties. It changes the relation to them. A wound will still sting. A loss will still hollow, but their tones shift when received in full presence. Pain arrives as a precise teacher rather than an anonymous enemy. Grief becomes a depth to be known rather than a condition to be fixed. In the same way, a gardener does not deny frost, but learns the rhythms of seasons, attention in the present learns the cycles of its own interior weather. The miracle is not the absence of hardship, but the cultivation of a ground that can receive hardship without being crushed by it. An important subtlety here is how small acts of attention transform the fabric of ordinary life. Holding a cup between hands can be an act of reverence. Listening to a voice without the immediate filter of response can be a radical hospitality. These micro-practices do not taste of spectacle. They taste instead of fidelity. Fidelity is the quiet sister of wonder. It keeps appointment with what is given rather than demanding what is promised elsewhere. Over time, fidelity knits together ephemeral instances into a continuous presence, and the life that once felt episodic becomes a woven whole. There is also an interpersonal consequence to this way of being. When someone stands in presence, however briefly, they transmit a kind of calm that is contagious because it requires no persuasion. Relationships, which often live on the currency of reactivity, begin to trade in the tension instead. Conflicts are met with a listening that is not neutral, but compassionate. Joys are shared with a fuller savor because they are not immediately redirected toward the next thing. The sacred in this sense is not confined to solitary stillness, but is a quality that can pass between people like a light through glass. Consider, too, the metaphor geography of the present. It is not a point on a clock, but a room with many doors, each breath a passageway that opens to different corners of experience. One door may lead to memory, another to sensation, another to the body's quiet intelligence. The discipline of presence is the art of moving through these doors without closing them prematurely, allowing each room its fullness. In doing so, we learn that the miraculous is not a rare event, but a particular way of abiding with whatever appears. As this section unfolds toward closure, imagine the seed beginning to germinate, a faint crack, a shy green thread searching upward through darkness. It does not announce itself with trumpet or banner. It merely responds in the slow grammar of growth to conditions that have been gathered moment by quiet moment. What would it mean to tend that emerging shoot in your own life? To give the small attentions that encourage steadiness rather than spectacle. The shy green thread that began to search upward in the dark soil is where we resume. A delicate insistence, a small breach that announces more by patience than by noise. Follow that breach until it becomes a habit of rising, a daily fidelity to what it is to be alive. The shoot does not demand headlines, it simply turns itself toward what sustains. In the same way, each moment of attended breathing, each minute of arrival in presence is a tiny breach in the pattern of distraction. These breaches accumulate like secret weather, and at a certain point, the ground itself has shifted enough to allow new forms of life. There is a hush in germination that asks for humility. It is not the grandiosity of sudden insight, but the domestic holiness of tending, watering without spectacle, protecting against frost without panic, giving time its ordinary share. Humility here is not self-negation, but a precise acknowledgement of limits. The recognition that growth is often the fruit of small, consistent acts, rather than genius or force. In this register, wonder is not the conquest of extraordinary events, but the recognition that the ordinary, when fully seen, contains inexhaustible depth. The journey toward light carries a paradoxical economy. The less you attempt to possess the present, the more it reveals itself. Possession tightens the hand and blunts perception. Openness relaxes the muscles of expectation and allows detail to be felt. The practice of presence is thus an unlearning as much as a learning. It asks us to set down the habitual scripts that narrate experience before it occurs, and to trust that perception, when allowed to be immediate, will render a truer account than speculation ever could. There is a clarity that only appears when the need to control recedes. Imagine now a field of such shoots, not a single stubborn plant, but a collective of tender uprisings, each breathing its small miracle into the same air. The scene suggests that presence is a communal ache as much as it is a private discipline. When one person's attention deepens, it tends to loosen the defensive posture in others. Attention spreads like a gentle contagion. In communities formed by such habits, conversation changes its tempo. Decisions are made with a different gravity, and ordinary kindnesses acquire a more potent currency. The sacred ceases to be an isolated visitation and becomes the tenor of common life. The culmination of these movements is not a climatic arrival, but a settled clarity in which the radical and the ordinary cohabit. The miracle that Thich Nhat Hanh points to, the miracle of standing on the earth, of living in the present, reveals itself as a house with many rooms, rather than a single luminous moment. In that house, the breath functions as a doorway, the body as altar, relationships as ongoing practice. The practitioner discovers that the whole of life can be a practice of presence, without theatricality, and that such practice does not remove sorrow, but deepens the capacity to hold it with grace. Toward the close of this path, imagine the shoot finally unfurling a leaf, a modest plane of green, perfectly formed, catching light and offering shade. The leaf is small but complete. It contains the grammar of a tree. So too, a single moment of true presence, fully inhabited, contains within it all the qualities we seek: attention, compassion, steadiness, insight. It does not promise permanence, but offers an entry point that, repeated, becomes transformation. Allow the image to linger, the leaf opening, the field of shoots breathing together, the quiet work of light changing ordinary surfaces into sacred thresholds. Let the final shape of the narrative be simple. The extraordinary is not a distant embassy, but the skin of the daily. The miracle is not a breach in law, but a recognition. The recognition that the present, when attended to without hurry or hunger, reveals itself as plenitude. Stand then on the earth you already have. Listen to the breath that is already yours. Notice the small shoot inside your life and tend it with the attention that turns bare existence into a quiet, luminous promise.